Today's guest is Gautam Basu, who is the managing partner and co-founder of True North Research. And we're going to be discussing a subject dear to my heart, why operations leaders make great CEOs. I'm Tony Wood from CEO Collaborative Forum, and that's here, CEO Reflects. Gautam, a very warm welcome back to CEO Reflects.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure to be back here with you.
Awesome. So, I mean, no kind of secret. I love me a bit of ops, and I saw this title and I went, okay, we have to do this. And I know that you put an incredible amount of knowledge and thinking into this. So what is operations leadership?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Tony. So, operations leadership, it's a combination of strategic thinking with an execution focus. Mm-hmm. It's required to have strong analytical skills with a deep understanding of processes and cost structure, coupled with exceptional inter-organizational, so across companies, but also intra-organizational, within the company across different functions. If you look at great operations leaders, they're required to balance short-term efficiency with long-term sustainability, and they enable or foster a culture of continuous improvement, once again, within and across business functions. And if we extend this to the broader supply chain, they need to influence the actions, behavior, and the performance of supply chain members, which includes both upstream suppliers and downstream customers. So that's in a nutshell. It's quite broad, but also quite deep.
So it's the backbone of any business. It's basically the core of any business, including all of the suppliers. So this is a massive part. So how does this, because it is such a large part, how does it differ from strategic leadership? So how do they differ?
Yeah. So if you think about strategic leadership, it's really around the big picture vision and also future orientation. So strategic leadership, it's responsible for the overall direction and long-term vision of the organization. And it serves as the guiding force for all activities and decisions. So strategic leaders require to develop a clear and a compelling vision for the organization. They're also quite future-oriented, anticipating changes and trends in the business environment. They need to analyze market trends, competitive landscape, internal, external factors that shapes a company's strategic direction, strategic planning, and the actual comprehensive strategy has to align with the mission and the values of the organization. So it's also setting realistic goals and objectives, determining the necessary steps to achieve them. Now, operations leaderships, they have to think strategically, but their primary focus is on the, let's say, tactical and execution oriented. So the time horizon is a bit shorter. So instead of like years, it's months, weeks, and even days. And now with the ubiquity of technology, it's even in real time. And also operations leaders, they must take the strategy, they have to have a good understanding of the corporate or the business strategy and translate that into an operations strategy. So an example of this would be, if you have, for example, a supply chain, where do you strategically locate production facilities, distribution centers, spare parts facilities, so on and so forth, so you can meet the customer requirements and needs. And if done properly, it could be a competitive advantage. So those are some of the primary differences. I would say the main difference is really from the time horizon. Strategic leadership is more longer term focus, whereas operations leadership is day-to-day tactical execution orientation.
But it's really interesting you say that, because I think that operation leaders need to have that strategic outlook or vista, because you're working, sure, you're feeling the pain day to day, which a lot of people don't do, but you've also got to make sure that you're ready for next year, 2 years, for your scaling or for issues. And so I think it kind of encompasses both. And do you find that there's a tension sometimes between people who have no ops background and are setting strategy and people with ops background, because they've never had that kind of something stopped and you have to fix it right now? that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think people that come typically from ops backgrounds, they have to get stuff done, right? So if it
Yeah.
doesn't get done, the business doesn't operate. So um, again, they are focused more on the present, and they have to ensure that the company's processes are efficient, cost-effective, and aligned with the strategy, with the tactical aspect. And it's all about really looking at the enhancing of the productivity, reducing the cost structure, enabling sustainability. And so I would say there are bridges between the strategic and the operational. You can't have one without the other, and they should be aligned, right? So, typically we look at operations and formulation of operation strategy. The main input is, of course, the business strategy. So, how are the customers segmented? Are they value based? Are they premium differentiation? You may have to run two different supply chains, for example.
Mm.
So again, it's really the implementation of the strategy and the achievement of the operation goals. That's where the bridge is. And I think that and we may talk about this later. People that come from operations, they actually make great executive leaders up to the chief
I think
executive
so.
officer.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So I mean, why would an operation? I mean, let's ask the question: why would
Yeah,
an operations leader make a great CEO?
yeah, sure. So a little bit of ruffling. Sorry about that.
No, that's right.
But yes, so why do they make great leaders? So, uh, first of all, we talked about it, strategic thinking and analytical skills. They
Yeah.
often, need to have those deep analytical skills to basically translate the strategy into operational goals and objectives, ideally to contribute to competitive advantage, right? Um, and typically, these type of leaders have a very good knowledge in knowing how to allocate and prioritize resources to get the most impact of the business. So that's one of the first things. The other thing is a very good grasp of cost structure and profitability, right?
Yeah.
And so by understanding the cost structure, operational leaders, they can identify areas where cost reductions or process improvements can lead to increased profit margins. So, for example, operational excellence, lean initiatives to optimize production processes, yield higher efficiency rates, higher yields, lower costs, and increasing profitability. So that's number two. I would say number three would be a deep knowledge of leveraging technology and data driven decision making. We know that, for example, academic disciplines like operations research or operations management, they are very analytical by nature. So it's you have to look at the data. You also have to have gut instinct and good intuition, but also supported by the data and the analytics to make sure that the trends that you're analyzing, the markets, the operational environment is doing. So I would say the knowledge of the technology, and so now we have AI, artificial intelligence. You have large language models, which are becoming much more mainstream, and so operations leaders are very, let's say, well adjusted to dealing with that. We have IoT, Internet of Things. That's also another one. Blockchain for chain of custody, international trade. That's another one. Of course, robotics, both physical robots in the factory, but also robotic process automation, RPA,
Yeah.
which is basically automating the software agents. So that's something that operations people know quite well and have to use on their daily basis. So that's a third or fourth. I would say another one is risk management. We've seen over the course of the last 3 years the term supply chain disruption used quite a
Yes.
bit, especially after COVID-19. But more recently, there was the Suez Canal blockage a couple of years ago, the geopolitical aspects in the Ukraine and the Middle East, and now the Red Sea, which have all created havoc on global supply chains. So operations leaders need to be able to identify these risks, mitigate these risks, and come up with solutions. So what we've typically seen is many of these operations leaders, they've gone to the executive and even the board level attention, because if you can't get your products the suppliers, the logistics capacity, the production capacity, then the business can't deliver at all to their customers. So a complete breakdown in the system wreaks havoc. So current chief executive officers, the supply chain disruptions keep them up at night. So that's another thing. And I would say the last thing why operations leaders make great CEOs is their ability to communicate effectively, both
Mm.
within the organization across business functions, as well as interorganizationally across supply chain partners. CEOs need to do that. They have to talk to their people, they have to persuade, they have to influence, they have to talk to analysts. So having those communication, those interpersonal skills is very important. And supply chain operations professional. Now we know there's global supply chain, so they have to be able to communicate across cultures, across different communication styles. So those of us that come from ops backgrounds, we're more and more accustomed to dealing with that. So I would say those 4 or 5
Mm.
characteristics around strategic analytical thinking, use of technology, risk management, and communication skills are really reasons why ops leaders make great CEOs.
Yeah, I agree because it's one of those things where your ops leaders will know where things are going to break, and they'll
Yeah,
generally be focused on working on those. Whereas if you work coming at it from a strategic point of view, you go, "Why are you doing that?"
right.
Because it must be really. I almost feel sorry for people who don't have that ops background because they're
Yeah,
strategic. They don't know how things work. They don't. They have a view of how things are connected together, but the
sure.
challenge comes is then they want to have this person who they can totally trust to
Yeah,
make sure that things work. So there needs to be, even if you are not the CEO as an ops, you need to work so closely with your CEO and have that level of trust to work.
absolutely.
And I would say also, is there what would you ask for ops leaders who maybe don't have some of the strategic skills that people who have not come from ops background, they've built other skills, what would you recommend they look at? What would you say if you want to be a CEO? These are the things you would work on.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the first and foremost thing is understand the connection between operations and finance. So how
Yeah.
does operations really create financial value and utility, economic utility? I think that is really helps out a lot because sometimes operations people can also have a myopic focus. They're very much focused on the plant, very much focused on the distribution center, and so it can be myopic. So I would say to broaden the horizon. I often liken it to the T-shaped profile. It was an old
Oh,
IBM recruitment thing where you have the horizontal, which is kind of the breadth, and then you have the vertical, which is the depth. And so we tend to be, as ops people, very deep in one area, whether it's production, whether it's service operations, logistics, technology, so on and so forth. But I think in order to be a CEO, you have to be quite broad, almost like a
mm,
generalist. So I would say, once you have that level of depth, broadening out that horizon. So knowing things about finance, knowing things about marketing, knowing things about strategy, knowing things about product, and even psychology. So really broadening the horizon so you can be a more well-rounded company executive, and that's typically as somebody that has been within corporations and businesses, you know. 10, 20, 30 years, they tend to broaden out because at the end of the day, I would say one of the foremost things that a CEO has to do is they have to lead people, right? And so leading people, ops people do have that, especially if they're operations leaders. You have to maybe lead a factory within a production plant, for
mm.
example. And so, it's just basically expanding that, and talking to different types of stakeholders as well. So I would say to answer your question, it's really broadening horizons, strategy, finance, marketing, and basically being able to, really broaden out your base of skills and competencies.
Would you then? So I'm now thinking it from the other side.
Yeah,
Is where you've got a board and they're thinking about the next CEO. what would you say to them about picking someone from an ops background? Because a natural thing for them to do would be say, I'm going to pick someone from strategy,
Right.
maybe from accounts, or maybe from another area which is more natural, maybe sales, etc., because business development, etc., all of that kind of thing. What would you say
Sure.
to the board to say, here's the things that I would look at when you're you're looking at your COO or you're looking at your ops leaders?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think that first and foremost, most businesses the customer comes first, right? So understanding the customer needs, the business development, the sales. I think going back to your previous question, that's the thing that ops people should also do. They should go on sales calls. They should understand what the customer wants, because at the end of the day, without a customer, there is no business, right? So
Mm.
I would say that being able to understand the sales process, what the customer needs are, what the customer values in terms of the product or the service, or delivery mechanisms. Ops leaders should do that. So I think if a board is considering let's say an ops leader, they probably have trust that that individual understands the process. They understand the cost structure. And typically coming from an ops background, we look at the everything under the top line revenue of the P&L. We look at the cost of goods sold, the SG&A. We understand that, and of course
Yeah.
we look at profit, but less so on the revenue. And so I think again, if the board is considering somebody who is coming from an ops background, make sure that that individual is doing ride-alongs with the salespeople to understand what's really valued, so they can again broaden their horizons to kind of sit into that, let's say, chief executive officer role, because at the end of the day, that individual needs to sell their company, sell their products, sell their services. They have to be almost like the chief sales officer in a way.
I love that. So, are there any real life examples where people have come from ops and they've moved up then to a CEO position?
Yes, there are, and this is something I've been studying, at university. So the first one comes to mind that I think a lot of people know is Tim Cook, the
Yeah.
CEO of Apple. So Tim was of course, the COO, or the Chief Operating Officer under Jobs. They had a very good relationship, but Tim also kind of comes from a supply chain and operations background. So when they were doing the iPhone, there was the famous story about securing all the, let's say, the Gorilla Glass, the Corning capacity,
I
and
remember that time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that's basically sourcing and procurement and supplier management. So, Tim, before he was at Apple, he was working for IBM, and he was in a supply chain role at IBM. And being a former IBMer myself, they had one of the strongest supply chains there. So he's a guy that comes to mind that made it to the CEO spot, that comes from an ops background. But there's a few others. Marilyn Hewson from Lockheed Martin. She also comes from an ops background. Carlos Brito from Anheuser-Busch InBev. I think he came from a logistics and supply chain background. Brian Krasnick from Intel. He also has one, and also Mary Barra from General Motors. So we're seeing a trend in the last, let's say, decade or decade and a half, of more operational leaders that actually, get to that top spot within the organization, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Because at the end of the day, who knows the processes and the work activity breakdown structures and the
Yeah,
organization better than ops people?
yeah.
So again, it's just stepping up into that role, which dealing with your communication, dealing with the persuasion, dealing with the sales skills, business development skills. I think they make beautiful CEO roles, and we've seen that trend, in the last decade or so, where these people have stepped in very nicely into the CEO role.
No, I like that. And one thing I'd love is what advice would you give? What bits of advice would you give to somebody who's in that ops position and they want to become CEO? What would you recommend they do?
Right. I would say first and foremost, deliver the value through operations first, because your reputation is everything, right? And so if you have a reputation of delivering value, then that will ascend into the organization, and people will hear about you. I would say that's first and foremost, being really good at what you do. And then the next would be, again, as we talked, broadening your horizons, because once you're 10, 15, 20, even 30 years in the role, you don't want to be pigeonholed as the logistics guy or the production guy or the lean guy, because then you'll just do that over and over and over again. So, broadening the horizon, getting to know, for example, deals, transactions. How do you basically evaluate an acquisition? How do you merge or acquire a company and incorporate that company within the operational footprint? Another person that you mentioned, I didn't mention, was Ginny Rometty, who was a former IBM.
Yeah.
So she was the person who integrated the PwC management consulting division into IBM Global Services.
Oh,
So
okay.
she had the massive job in incorporating and integrating human capital into
Yeah.
IBM's infrastructure. And so, that role basically gave her the kind of like the ladder into the top spot. So again, I mean, I would say number one is definitely broaden the horizons, or that's number two. Number one is be really great at what you do.
Yeah.
So that's the depth, right? And then your reputation will precede you, and they'll say, hey, Tony's really excellent at this. He does this excellently, world class. And then start to broaden the horizons: strategy, finance, marketing, sales, and getting those under your belt little by little, so you can become more well-rounded.
Love it. Gautam, amazing. I wish I could talk to you for hours. I think there's loads of things I'd love to delve into. You mentioned a little bit earlier,
Yep.
maybe on another podcast, is talking about how ops and AI can be blended in together, because a lot of people are either
Sure.
worried about it, they're worried about leakage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it would be really great maybe in the future that we have a follow-on conversation. So I'm trying to
I'd
say is,
love to.
will you come back?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned AI, and you know AI has been around for many years. So if you look at, for example, our operations research, those are quantitative and mathematical models. So it's really stems. AI is kind of a natural progression of that. Of course, now it's mainstream now with ChatGPT and these large language models, but there are other AI stuff that's been around for very, very long time. I mean, I remember Herb Simon was playing chess games with IBM tabulating machines in the 50s and early 60s. So AI has been around, and so that's again another reason why operations people, they're well positioned, because we work with these type of models every single day.
So maybe what we do is we dig into that a little bit more in the future
Sure.
one. But now, Gautam, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure, Tony. Great to see you.